This episode was co-produced with Innovo, the innovation and investment promotion agency for the canton of Vaud. Check out www.innovo.ch/en to learn more.
There's no point in having extraordinary technology and a great biomarker that could reveal sepsis up to 72 hours before onset, before clinical recognition. Think about this for a second. That means that I'm able to test someone in an emergency setting at triage, and a nurse could detect early signs of sepsis 3 days before a doctor would actually recognize clinically the onset of sepsis. That is huge.
Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. If you enjoy listening to our show, make sure to follow the podcast and leave a rating. And now, here's your host, Merle.
I'm sitting here today with Patrick and François. Thank you both very much for being here and talking to me about all things startup savior, your journeys, and how we can support people like you, like yourself. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for hosting us.
Before we dive into the topic, I want to quickly introduce both of you so the listeners know who I'm here with today. So François, you've been a full-time innovation advisor at Innovo since 2023. And have been an innovation leader since 2020. These are amazing job titles. But can you tell us what this actually means to you on a day-to-day?
So at Innovo, basically, we are helping entrepreneurs to kind of thrive in the canton. So there are different tools for that. It's really opening doors to private or public institutions. Also helping them with coaching support or giving access to the institutional fundings that exist. And a little bit of promotion, such as today, which is one of the purpose of making the canton of Vaud shining abroad through its ecosystem.
Which is very important, I think, also for the whole startup ecosystem. And Patrick, you are a former management consultant, Silicon Valley executive and entrepreneur. So you literally have like 3 decades of global experience. And before working at the startup that we also want to talk about, you were a vice president of global strategic accounts for MindMaze and CEO of GateUp, which is actually a MindMaze subsidiary. Anything we forgot to mention or something that you want to highlight from these experiences?
Yeah, everything in between. Thanks for the question. I was commenting to the team as we were walking in that I started my career in Oerlikon 30 years ago.
Really?
So for me, it was a bit of a full circle. It's, funny for me to sort of be back here. This did not exist back then. It was still the old campus, the old factory. But I've gone around the clock a couple of times, around the block as well. And it's a pleasure to be here. But I think you've described it nicely.
So you're coming back home a little bit.
Yeah, in a way. I mean, I'm a Swiss American, but I do have roots in Zurich, as my name entails, but happy to be back at least to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, I love that. Perfect. So let's dive in. In 2024, I just mentioned already, hinted it a little bit, you became the CEO at Abionic, which is a medtech spin-off of EPFL. Some have said that Abionic's tech is similar to Theranos, which I think after the Netflix show, everybody knows what that is. But can you maybe tell us what exactly does Abionic do?
Okay, that's a very simple one, actually, because basically we're a medtech company. We're in vitro diagnostics, which means that we basically have the capability using nanofluidic technology to test for pretty much anything contained in a drop of blood. The technology is proven, it works, it's patented, it's protected, and unlike Theranos, which cast a long shadow on the entire industry, because we were basically reduced to being, just another blood company, which I think we're far more than that. It made things very complicated for anybody involved in in vitro diagnostics in the past decade. But the reality is, Abionic is still here. and she's sitting in jail.
I saw a post on this yesterday that her partner is starting a new blood testing company now.
Good luck.
Yeah.
But he raised a bit of capital, but that shows, again, the resilience and maybe the short memory innate to American markets. But it'd be interesting. I'm always welcoming new competition. And as somebody who's in the field, it's always interesting to see what exactly will they be looking for? What are they testing for? Mm-hmm. What's the market they're going after? And if there's a real clinical utility for whatever it is they're looking for. But hey, bring it on.
When you mention diagnostic with blood, any specific diagnostic you're doing right now?
I mean, the main focus of the company for the past 5 years has pretty much been, the early detection of sepsis. Mm-hmm. Sepsis is a big deal. It's something that, affects 2.5 million Americans every year, of which 500,000 die. It's 50 million cases in the world with 11 million deaths. Sepsis is something that is as prevalent in Europe as well. We're over 3 million cases. So, whether you're a rich country, poor country, or low income, high income, as they call them today, sepsis is something that needs to be reckoned with. It's a real-time emergency that's time sensitive and needs to be treated as soon as it is recognized in order to, help survival rates, of course.
Can you take us back to the day when you joined the company, the situation it was in at that moment?
So I've got a checkered past with Abionic because I was part of an investment drive. As an angel investor, I had actually invested in the company about a decade ago under a completely different model. It was a bet on the technology. Nanofluidics, was pretty much going to revolutionize diagnostics. And to this day, I still believe this. I think what's important here is the company went through the classic ups and downs of research and development and trying things and looking for markets and product market misfit, et cetera, et cetera. At some point, we basically invested pretty much the entire ranch on the pancreatic stone protein, which is an emerging biomarker for the early detection of sepsis that is now proven clinically to basically provide clinicians with early information on the emergence, on the onset of sepsis in at-risk patients. So from a diagnostics perspective, the ability to identify and screen for sepsis is going to be a big game changer in everything related to sepsis management.
Yet the technology could allow other type of tests, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we focus, like most startups at some point need to focus on one thing. It's easy to try to become sort of a Swiss pocket knife and have multiple, features at your disposal. I think at one point it's good to know that you're a blade and you're a good blade and you're a sharp blade. And then we can always develop from there. So nanofluidics basically gives you the strength, it gives you the capability from a technology perspective to test infinite, small quantities of fluid. We're talking about 50 microliters. That's, a drop of blood is a minuscule amount of blood. We're not drawing big quantities, but we're just using what we call a finger prick, which literally just a drop of blood, 50 microliters. And this is sufficient for us using nanofluidic technology to identify whatever marker it is we're looking for. The big push for us today is pancreatic stone protein, or PSP, as you'll hear me talk about it during the course of this podcast.
So when you joined, what was the business situation of Abionic?
The company's 14 years old, and Nicolas Durand, the founder, and he's the brain behind him, and Yvon Merki co-founded the company back in 2010. They were the brain power behind the abioSCOPE, which is the instrument. And an instrument isn't worth much unless you test something on that instrument. The big challenge for most startup companies, beyond just having an instrument to test something, is to effectively develop an effective panel of tests. What exactly are you going to test using this technology. And there's been hits and misses. The company started with allergens back in the day, and that proved to be an interesting market to go after, but not necessarily the right one. So they pivoted to other types of markers like D-dimer and ferritin, et cetera, et cetera. But those, again, didn't prove very commercial in any way because the market wasn't necessarily there until we obtained the unique exclusive rights to the use of PSP for the diagnosis of sepsis. And that's the marker that we've effectively been working on for the past 7 years and developing ever since. So we're focused very much today on bringing pancreatic stone protein into the market using our abioSCOPE as an instrument and to position this in different hospital settings for the early detection of sepsis.
So when you came in and you saw basically what you just described, where it was, what was the first thing that you tackled? Or what kind of things did you change?
Well, I'm the kind of guy that drinks about 7 espressos in the morning, and then I stop. So I had a couple of coffees, took a big, breath in, breath out. I basically spent a lot of time with Yvonne and Nicolas back then. So I knew basically what state the business was in. And it was complicated because over the years, you raise a lot of capital, you start to incur a bit of debt. It gets complicated to advance into the milestone that you've planned, and investors get disappointed. Timelines take longer. The reality of the matter is, I think it takes a better part of a decade from an idea to maybe a beginning of a product in the medtech space, and investors need to understand this. So I walked in initially as an early investor, but having been in the industry and having been around and in different leadership roles, I also have a lot of operational experience, and I'm inherently a commercial person. I'm a sales guy, and the idea here is to bring this tech to a place where it has the most utility for a clinician. And that's what I'm currently working on.
Are you saying that you had a different vision from your former CEO or not?
I think the vision all along was the same. We may not have the same trajectory. There are many paths to a summit. If I could use some mountaineering analogy, as we are in Switzerland, I'm a keen mountaineer, and basically you could make it to the top of the Matterhorn, but there's multiple ways up there. So I think we both understood where we were trying to go. What wasn't clear at the time is which pathway would be the most successful. And sometimes it's important to have the courage to recognize that a certain path wasn't the right way and maybe backtrack a bit and start again somewhere else. We talk about pivots, change the strategies, et cetera, et cetera. This is exactly what we went through. So Nicolas and I always had the same vision in which I had invested in 10 years prior. And it was just about execution and maybe changing the game plan and the go-to market approach to Abionic.
What's interesting in this story is that the former CEO, Nicolas, is now in the board. Mm-hmm. So how do you deal with this relationship now? Because you are doing things in a different ways than you used to do. So is there any conflict, or are you still? How does that work?
So Nicolas was always on the board. As a founder, our shareholders agreement basically reserved 2 seats for the shareholders, for the founders, shareholders, and independents. So, it was a board of 6. So he was always on the board, except that he was on the board as a founder, and he was the CEO of the company with operational and execution responsibility. I'd almost say that may cause some issues because in a way you're on the board influencing decisions, yet in my opinion, the CEO actually reports to a board. Mm-hmm. I personally am not on the board of directors of Abionic, nor should I be, and nor am I pushing for this. Having Nicolas on board is good for me. We get along very well. We've known each other for a decade. I think we have immense respect for each other. And yes, I do things differently, but I think we're starting to show that with a different time comes a different need for different skills, different expertise. And Nicolas had the prescience to recognize that he had reached the end of where he could take Abionic. He had developed the product, the platform. He had raised a tremendous amount of money. And to this, of course, I'm forever thankful, because as a shareholder and now a stakeholder, Abionic is in part where we are thanks to his hard work and that of the team prior to me. You know, we build on top of each other. Now it's about taking the company on a different trajectory, but ultimately, I think the summit is the same.
I think it also takes, you know, the ability to reflect and see that's the vision. And I'm not able at this point to get it there, but I know somebody that could get it there. Can I ask actually how you took the team along?
That's never easy, because the company went through a big phase post-COVID of complete reorganization, restructuring. So the company went from being, 60 full-time equivalents to about 20 today. So today we're about 20 plus some consultants here and there in different markets. But basically the team hasn't changed so much. But it was complicated because when the founder and unique CEO of the company after 14 years leaves a company, there's many reasons for many to believe that things are just going pear-shaped. And, are we on the Titanic? Are we the ones just playing the instrument to the last minute? And who's this guy coming in? And what's he possibly going to do to somehow change the course of Abionic's trajectory? I think where things helped with the board is that Nicolas handpicked me. He went to the board and he said, guys, we've known Patrick for years. Here's his track record. I think he's the guy to replace me. And to be honest, it was a complex situation and still is. I don't think it would have been very easy to find many people with the courage, the grit and the audacity to take something like this on. And it's funny because many people have told me, what on earth are you doing? Why at this stage of your career are you taking this challenge on?
And why?
Yeah, I was just about to ask that.
So why?
Why did you do it?
Why?
Don't they say, when they asked someone, why did you climb Everest? Well, because it was there, because we could, but that's in a way for me, I get more out of fixing hard challenges than to stay the course and just sort of run day-to-day businesses. And my entire career has just been one big change management wave that I've surfed over the years on 3 continents and multiple companies. And I enjoy the challenge of fixing things.
So you know that you have the nickname of being the savior of company, right?
Startup savior.
Let's not skin the bear just yet, because I think we're a year into what I believe is a 3-year transition plan. You don't change things overnight. I think the transition for Abionic started when Nicolas was forced to restructure. So when they went down from 60 to 20, when he departed the company, I joined. We're now a year into my tenure, and I believe that we still have a couple of years of work. But I believe the trajectory is a good one, and we're on the right track to finally turning Abionic into something that we can all call a success.
What is that success? Like, what is your ambition with Abionic? Where do you see it in the future?
Working in the medtech field, this may sound a bit corny, but at the end of the day, there's no point in having extraordinary technology and a great biomarker that could reveal sepsis up to 72 hours before onset, before clinical recognition. Think about this for a second. That means that I'm able to test someone in an emergency setting at triage, and a nurse could detect early signs of sepsis 3 days before a doctor would actually recognize clinically the onset of sepsis. That is huge. And that has the power of changing, the standard of care. This could make it into policies one day. And I think the earlier we can actually get this new marker into the hands of prescribers for the benefit of patients, I'll have done my job.
So what's your area of focus? If we want to make the exercise to boil it down to 3 main things to do, what would they be?
Sell, sell, sell. No business can call itself a business unless it manages to commercialize its products. At some point, and I think we need to break away from this tendency of always wanting to raise more money and yet another round and, oh, geez, we're close to bankruptcy. Let's get another bridge loan and a convertible. And, there's plenty of instruments in the industry to help to keep us afloat. But at some point, you need to be able to make a product for $1 and sell it for $3. And that profit is what makes the business run. We wouldn't be in the business for very long if we weren't able to deploy these products. And deploying a product means commercializing, marketing, sales, manufacturing, production, maintenance, servicing, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's important to not forget that we're not here just to build things, but we're here to deploy this innovation and put it in the hands of prescribers.
So I believe the former CEO tried to do that, right? But it's a matter of strategy and tactics, rather, right? So what would be your strategy and tactics to really reach that market and sell more?
I think there's many things that work in my favor at this point. When you try to market a new biomarker, you must know that there's hundreds of biomarkers out there, for all sorts of things. When you try to sell a new platform, a new instrument with a new biomarker that no one's ever heard of, it's a double whammy, right? It makes it twice as hard to convince people. It's like, well, okay, I get the technology bet. I see nanofluidics. Yeah, I could see, wow, a 7-minute test, beautiful. I get that. The drop of blood, that's great. However, what's this marker you're talking about? Show me the evidence. Do you have any papers I can see, peer-reviewed? And the scientific community, absolutely needs to see the evidence. When we talk about evidence-based research, that's exactly what it means. You're not just making up claims, you are backing your claims with actual scientific results. Clinical trials, studies, papers that are published around the world. This is how markers gain, fame around the world. When more and more prescribers talk about those markers and say, hey, you know what? We've actually tried it in our hospital and it works. So I think 5 years in, we've got the benefit today of having an IVDR certification for Europe. The platform is CE marked, and we just gained our 510K in the US last November, which gives us full credibility. That's effectively the authority saying your marker works. But that's just the beginning. And I think this is what's the main difference between, I would say, the old regime and the new regime is to say, well, now we've done all the science, we've built it, we've proved it, but now basically the commercial exercise of going to market in what is otherwise an extremely fragmented European market and an equally fragmented US market, not to mention the rest of the world, that's just a completely different story. And that's where we are now, as we scale up into from a pre-commercial into a commercial organization. It's about selling.
I think this is actually a struggle that many startups face, specifically if they come out of a, tech university or so, because they're, they learned to focus on research and development, and then they need to commercialize it. So how do you personally now balance this? Or do you have any tips on how they can balance these two very important strategies?
That's interesting because we were chatting about this on the train on the way up. At the end of the day, I think our universities need to spend a bit more time educating our scientists with business ideas, and likewise, teaching some of our business people about the science. Now, it's easier to train a scientist in understanding the fundamentals of business than the opposite. I'm convinced of this. It's rare to find sort of the brilliant, marketeer that also has 2 PhDs and an innate understanding of nanofluidics, for example. But combining the two, I think, can be done. I think it's about giving equal weight to both technology development as well as understanding technology for what purpose, to what end. Tech with no purpose is dead tech. I think if scientists, researchers, PhDs, masters people at the EPFL and the ETH can start to imagine, okay, am I developing a solution to a problem that actually exists? Or am I developing a solution and I'm going to have to go find a problem to fix with my solution? And I think that's what you're referring to. Too often, we spend years developing solutions, yet we don't have a clear idea of what the problem is we're trying to fix. And that's the issue.
And when you say clear, how much clear should it be?
At the end of the day, it's one thing to identify a gap in a market. And we spend years thinking, you know what? Look, no one's doing this. Clearly there's an opportunity. Let's go in there. And you focus all your energies in going after that gap in the market. Whereas I'd completely flip the question around and say, well, is there an actual market in the gap that you've identified? And I think too often companies end up having spent 5 years of developing, some great feature only to realize that there's no real clinical utility, to go back to my field, but this is true of also other industrial uses. Is anybody actually willing to pay for this? And if so, how much are they willing to pay? What's the actual value of the service that you provide? And will it be above and beyond your cost of goods? I mean, these are all fundamental questions that need to feed into a business plan. It's not just, we'll get to that at some point, but I'm just going to use this Suisse money and have a good time for the next 3 years developing great technology. I think it's about finding balance, is what I'm trying to say.
This episode was sponsored by Property, the leading real estate agent for all real estate transactions with a comprehensive ecosystem. They combine highly trained experts with the latest technologies on an intelligent platform to provide clients, brokers, and service partners with risk-free, flexible, and simplified services. Learn more at property.com. That's property with an I.com.
Is there a market for the gap, or is the gap there because it's just a gap and nobody needs it? I think it's a very interesting point. You mentioned before something that still rings in my head, and that was that people should also get away from, I'll do another funding round and then I get that bridge money, etc., etc. This is something that we've been hearing a lot, though, also from other startups, that long-term funding is more and more difficult. I don't know if maybe especially in Switzerland, but this is the market that we talk a lot to, obviously. What's your experiences on this? Like, have you seen that as well? Is it true that it's more difficult to attract investors, maybe especially also after 10 years of existence? What's your opinion on this?
I think it's about expectation management. Switzerland's great to start businesses. We've got great intellectual capabilities here, great in intellectual property, great universities. I mean, clearly it's a very fertile ground for innovation. The challenge is always going to be, where do you go once you've reached that stage where you've got sort of a, technology readiness level of, say, 4 or 5, which is a way to measure basically how advanced your development is on a scale of 1 to 9. 1 being the beginning and 9 being full commercialization. A lot of companies get stuck in the middle of that pathway because at some point when you start to need to industrialize, you need to go to market. You want to go after the U.S. or you want to start manufacturing in China, whatnot. It takes just a lot of capital. Growth capital, I find, is probably more difficult to find in Switzerland versus early stage capital. And I think this is probably what people are referring to. Once you start to go look for the big tickets, all of a sudden it's a shame, in my opinion, despite the innate wealth in this country and the serial entrepreneurs we have and the fortunes that have been made in this very country. We're sitting on the site of a wonderful Zurich-based industrial legacy. It says a lot about Switzerland as a powerhouse. Well, it's a shame that today's entrepreneurs at some point need to fly across the Atlantic because that's where they'll find the risk takers willing to back, large large rounds of growth capital investment.
So if we talk about countries, what's your go-to-market strategy right now? Are you focusing only on the US? Are you also looking into Europe?
So Europe was our first natural place. You'd think we'd be successful in Switzerland for various reasons. Switzerland is a highly fragmented, very small market. So it's great to test concepts, but we don't really see Switzerland as a go-to. We've got a network of distributors that take care mostly of Southern Europe. We've got distributors in Asia and the rest of the world. But in terms of direct-to-market access, I'm personally focused on Germany, France, the UK being the three largest medtech markets in Europe, as well, of course, since we've gotten our 510K in November, I'm building a team out in the US to go after the US market.
I want to ask you this question because also of your personal background. How do you see the cultural differences also influencing startups from Switzerland? Because I think this is very interesting insight, right? To see the difference from investors in Switzerland and also investors in the US. You mentioned already risk taking. I could imagine it's also very culturally based. What kind of differences do you see?
Let me answer with a cliche, if I may. I think the main difference between European investors or entrepreneurs, not so much entrepreneurs, let's say European investors and American investors, and then in the US, they're diametrically opposite. In Europe, we're afraid of failing. So when you're afraid of failing, you'll do everything in your possible to basically avoid risk averse. And in the US, I would say that people are afraid of not succeeding. There's this drive to basically, I want to succeed and I will do anything in my power to succeed at this venture. And I think that's not just me saying this for the sake of saying it, but I think if you just look at the raw numbers, you know what? Look at the data. Just look at the amount of capital invested in the US. One of my competitors last year invested $100 million in November through a US VC. How can one not be amazed at the amount of capital these companies are able to raise out in California, Boston, wherever in the US? It's just a different way of looking at opportunities.
So you talked about the mindset of investors. What about the mindset of customers? So you have a strategy of going to market into different countries. How, when you want to deliver this value proposition to those different markets, how close should you be to your customer to really understand? And what was your strategy to understand that better?
Healthcare, life science in general, is an extremely conservative. It's ironic considering that there's so much innovation happening in the pharma world and medtech, beautiful innovation that sometimes doesn't quite make it to market because, standards of care are done a certain way. There's a generation of doctors that are in charge. They've learned it one way. So some of the younger meds coming in, they're the ones bringing new innovation. You could talk about, artificial intelligence. What's going to be the impact of this in healthcare? I think all of that is very positive. But it takes just a long time to convince people. You have to evangelize the products and the benefits. You need evidence and more evidence. And when you think you have enough evidence, they ask you for yet more evidence. So we're starting to see this as we deploy around the world. People will take our studies for granted, say, oh, great, you got a European study, 400 patients, that's beautiful. Well, now, for our own regulatory approval process in, say, a country like Malaysia or Thailand, they'll want to test that on some of their local population, and that's fair. That's fair game. So there's a lot of steps. The pathway to the market, the regulatory pathway is complex and different for every single country. So when you think you've nailed a hospital workflow, one of my KOLs used to make me smile because he'd say, Patrick, when you've seen one hospital, you've seen one hospital.
So that was my question actually behind. Are you looking after understanding all the processes from all those different countries / all different hospitals? How do you manage that?
So we've put together a network of distributors in parts of the world. But as a commercial entrepreneur, for me, it was very important to understand what those processes were. And that's why we're going directly to market in Germany, directly in France, and directly into the UK. And the idea is not to deploy ultimately at scale in those countries, but to learn how you sell one widget through that whole procurement process, and then pass the baton on to a distributor who then will sell 1,000 widgets at scale. But I don't think it's the business of Abionic to deploy, its technology and tests around the world on its own. It's going to be a combination of strategics. It's going to be a combination of indirect selling through distributors in certain markets, and possibly in some key markets, direct selling.
So are you deploying more sales rep in Abionic from Abionic? Or how do you structure accordingly your company?
So for the time being, the go-to is about testing the waters. So I've got consultants working for us, specific consultants with specific skill sets. And I think this goes back to one of the questions you asked earlier. It's at some point, when you're very much tech-driven, tech development, science-driven, there's not so much a good understanding of, well, what exact skill set do we actually need to commercialize this thing? Do we need to understand, market access and reimbursement policies? Well, at some point, yeah, you do need to understand this, because it could make or break a complete go-to-market strategy. So there's no point in showing up, investing in a workforce, boots on the ground, as we call it, if ultimately, no insurance is willing to pay for the product that you're effectively deploying in the marketplace. You better learn these things early rather than late.
So you're based in Switzerland, but you work with the consultants in each of the countries.
That's right. So we're based at the Biopole in Lausanne, not far from the EPFL, where the company was founded. And now I would say the center of gravity is destined to change towards and to tilt towards the U.S. One of the reasons Nicolas brought me on board as a sort of Swiss American, and I come with experience on both sides of the Atlantic, the idea is to help Abionic bridge that gap and start to focus more on what should be, in time, over time, our largest market by far.
So right now your strategy is really to sell. You said it to us 3 times already, but are you also in R&D to understand whether there would be other opportunity also to gain more market or more opportunity to sell, basically, with other, because your technology can do other things?
So the DNA of the company is clearly a research company. It was born at the EPFL. This is where it grew up. And I would say fundamentally, we've got some R&D capability, but I must say that during one of the last funding rounds, one of the conditions for the loan was to say, stop looking and start selling. I mean, brutally said, this is exactly what happened. So the idea was to say, stop looking for yet another feature, more bells and whistles, but you have a product, you have a great platform, CE marked, your markers IVDR, you're about to get the 510K, get out there and go and sell it. Start to generate some revenue. And what we do, however, is continuous business improvement, continuous product improvement. So we are investing some capital in making sure that our products keep in line with, a natural product lifecycle development. So we're evolving our test capsule. We're considering other markers to add to this test, because for me, it's not so much if we're going to make it to market, it's when we get to market. And when I get positioned in that triage setting in the ED, like I mentioned before, well, at that point, that's when I'll want to make sure that I've got other tests in my assay, in my portfolio, that can address the needs of triage nurses at the beginning of the hospital patient pathway.
And then looking forward, like what type of exit or future plans make sense for the company?
I think I alluded to this before, when unfortunately many innovative medtech companies at some point can't possibly scale to the size they would need to be truly successful on a global basis. And what happens in most cases, usually there's strategic alignment that happens with what we call strategics in the industry. So other companies that already occupy a certain space and could leverage your product and add it to their portfolio. That's the easiest way to gain market share. Building that from scratch, I mean, just to give you an example, I would probably need to put together an army of roughly 40 boots on the ground, actually 40 chaps, that's 80 boots on the ground, to deploy a commercial workforce in the US, just to give you a sense of size of what it would actually take. That's doable, but we would need growth capital and time. And I have neither at this point. So it's important to keep that in balance as well. So the strategic pathway is usually a preferred route for many companies like ours to find the ideal partner.
And we were also mentioning that at the very beginning. Why did you join? Do you have personal objectives you would like to achieve, to have reached through that experience?
I think at the end of the day, if we can just get this product in the hands of as many prescribers as possible to help as many patients as possible, on a personal basis, we'll be very satisfied.
What is I will be missing in the training, that things you cannot be trained on? What is the skill you need to have for running what you're running right now?
That's a loaded question. I'm not so sure it's skill more than attitude. I like to break things down into aptitude and attitude. The aptitude is your skills, your education, your training, all that good stuff, right? All of us can acquire that. Attitude is different. It's, what do you decide to do on a Monday morning as you walk into the office, dealing with a bunch of, conflictual emails on the train, and then you need to deal with some other issues. And, attitude is, I think, is the key to success. It's having a positive attitude. It's about seeing the glass that's, half full and not half empty. And that goes maybe back towards this comment I made earlier about, how you see the world in general, right? I mean, we could just see all the problems, or no, I think we've got problems to overcome. We've got solutions to sidestep all of these issues. And that's what drives us as a team. And I like to think that the team today is exactly in that mindset. So it's not easy because I'm the oldest guy on the team. That's the first. When I started my career in Oerlikon, I was not the oldest guy on the team. I was the youngest guy on the team back then. But today I'm the oldest guy, and people tend to look at me or up to me or towards me. I don't believe in hierarchies, by the way, but I'm a modern manager for that stake. But basically, I think it's about sharing the vision with everybody else and making sure that everybody realizes that we're on the same boat and we're all going in the same direction.
Resilience?
Resilience, of course. And grit is another one. Grit. Grit is one of those words you may have to go Google to figure out what it actually means in German and French. It's part resilience. It's this je ne sais quoi, to actually go after something and keep doing it, but not repeatedly in a silly fashion, where at some point you also need to recognize that something doesn't work, then stop doing it. And tech should do it differently and have maybe the emotional intelligence to recognize limitations. Maybe there are some things that I don't see. I don't know what I don't know. And that's why I think building a solid board around me to help me, to guide me, to support me, to help me is important when you talk about corporate governance. It's the key.
Is it just to mention, I just remember that right now, it's Elon Musk once said, being a CEO is like staring at the abyss while eating glass. Do you feel that way, or?
Jeez. Well, let me try to put a positive spin on this. I think he's right in a way. I mean, there's many things that seem under control, and then yet there are many things where we need to appear under control, where we know. For example, it could be a funding round. It could be having to bring bad news to employees or something, where you keep a straight poker face and you try to. I don't want to say. I hate this cliche, fake it till you make it. I don't believe in faking it till you make it. But there's a part of that where you absolutely need to believe in what you're doing, even if at some point things get pretty dark. And here's one thing to think about. The night is the darkest just before sunrise. And that's where, in a way, I'd like to leave many people with some thoughts about this, that when you may feel complete despair, keep in mind that that darkest point of the night means that the sunrise is just around the corner.
That's a great ending.
That is a wonderful.
I want to
ending.
continue. I'm not done.
Continue.
What do you want to share?
How do you know the light after the tunnel is not the train?
You know, this glass half empty, half full?
Yeah.
That's exactly what I mean.
Comes back to attitude right there.
Clearly, he's got the
It's
aptitude to make up
provocative
the
on
attitude.
purpose, right? It's provocative on purpose.
Mais c'est vrai que could it be a train on the same track?
Yeah.
Okie dokie.
I do have one more question. Do you have any maybe resources, or were there any things that you used along the way to help you? Could be, I don't know, any books or podcasts or anything that you want to recommend to listeners where you say, like, this is so inspiring, or maybe talking about attitude just gives you positive vibes to go into the day before having 7 shots of espresso?
The School of Hard Knocks. I don't think you can read all you want. There's plenty of books, and there's plenty of people that make plenty of money selling you, the equivalent of snake oil in management books, right? I think at the end of the day, what is irreplaceable is 30 plus years of experience. So in a way, today I'm in a role because I can bring together, I can connect dots from throughout my career, even in areas that you may think have absolutely nothing to do with medtech. And I'll pull back into situations of experience in my early days in management consulting, where you're exposed quite quickly to many different projects, problems, industries, and all of them have quite a few things in common. Most businesses, at the end of the day, are very similar. You sell different things. I mean, you're in the business of organizing podcasts, and at some point you need technology and equipment, you need know-how, attitude, aptitude. And at the end of the day, it's very simple to assess, the fitness of a company and to see whether or not it's going to go places. And I think all of this, it's that strength that comes from experience. And that, unfortunately, you can't take a bill for.
Wonderful. I think this is such a packed episode full of really good stories and advice. I'm very, very happy that you both were here and shared so much knowledge. I think it will be very, very inspiring for our listeners. So thank you so much, both of you, for coming.
Thank you.
And being on our podcast. And I'm very, very eager to see what's happening with Abionic.
Well, thank you, Elise, for having us, for having me, and the opportunity to speak a bit about this journey that we're on what I call Abionic 2.0.
Thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Merci.
Thank you. Merci.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, you can support us by rating our show on Apple Podcasts. This way, we can reach an ever-growing number of aspiring entrepreneurs.